Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes, by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, taking part in a COVID vaccine trial, reporter Helene Cooper has type 1 and asthma and says she decided to apply after she met Dr. Anthony Fauci backstage at Meet the Press. She says at first he wouldn't really answer her questions about her odds.
And finally, he was standing by the door to go on air because we weren't in the same segment. And he just stops at the door. He was like, look, I'm not saying that you're a dead duck, but you just really need to not get it. And then he leaves. And I was like, oh, God, I really need to not get this.
Helene is now in a phase 3 vaccine trial. She's a New York Times Pentagon reporter and talks about what it's been like doing her job and living with T1D during this pandemic. And Tell Me Something Good, a couple of high-profile birthdays and diaversaries, plus innovations. Why see-through is your organizational friend. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am so glad to have you along. I'm your host, Stacey Simms, and we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. That was back in 2006. My husband lives with type 2. I don't have diabetes. I have a background in broadcasting, and that's how you get the podcast. There is so much in the news these days about the potential for a COVID vaccine, news about the trials, political news about vaccines. This episode is a personal story about one woman's experience going through one of the vaccine trials. So I just want to let you know about that right up front. And big thank you to Jillian McPhee, who in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group, shared the article that Helene Cooper wrote about her experience getting into the vaccine and a lot of what she shares here on the show, but I'll link that up. I reached out to Helene on Twitter and she graciously responded. Now, Helene has an incredible story even before she signed up for this trial. I mean, well before she was diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 15. She and her family fled here from Liberia, and I'm going to link up that story in the show notes at diabetes-connections.com. It'll be on the episode homepage. I'd really urge you to read that. But one of the problems with the vaccine trials, with all of the COVID vaccine trials, is getting enough people into them. I'm also going to link up more information on that, and I'm going to come back after the interview and talk a little bit more about it. I know you want to hear from Helene, and we will get to that in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop. It is so nice to find a diabetes product that not only does what you need, but also fits in perfectly with your life. OneDrop is that. It's the sleekest looking and most modern meter my family has ever used. And it's not just about their modern meter setup. You can also send your readings to the mobile app automatically and review your data anytime. Instantly share blood glucose reports with your healthcare team. It also works with your Dexcom, Fitbit, or your Apple Watch, not to mention their awesome test strip subscription plans. Pick as many test strips as you need and they'll deliver them to your door. OneDrop, diabetes care delivered. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo. My guest this week is doing us all a huge service by participating in one of the trials for the COVID vaccine. As we recorded this interview, Helene Cooper had taken the first shot. She is due for the second in just a few days as this episode airs. Helene is a New York Times Pentagon reporter, but she says that's not why she was selected. She explains it is because she lives with type 1, she has asthma, and she's Black. There are not enough people from any of those groups represented in any of the vaccine trials. I tried to cover a lot with Helene, and as this is an ongoing story, she was gracious enough to agree to come back on, maybe in a couple of weeks as she's further along, and share more about her experience. So here is our talk. Helene, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your experience. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here, Stacey. I've never been asked to talk to diabetics before, so this is kind of cool.
Oh, nice. Well, I always like to tell guests like you that you don't have to explain the difference between type 1 and type 2. We speak the language. We get it. I'm just so interested in so many of your experiences, but let's start with the COVID vaccine trial that I saw that article. It came to my attention. How did you get in the trial to begin with, if you could kind of start from the beginning?
Okay. I was watching Dr. Fauci on testifying, I think it was before the House. It was either July 30th or the 31st. And he said that all of these vaccine trials were getting underway, and he said they needed volunteers. And he rattled off the name of a website that you could go to volunteer. I don't know why I did it, but I just went onto the website and I filled it out. I said I was type 1 diabetic. I put that I have asthma. I filled everything out and went on about my business. And then a couple of weeks later, I was in the Outer Banks. So it was somewhere around the week of August 22nd, 23rd, 24th, something like that. I got a phone call on my cell phone from GW, from a clinical research associate, who said I had been picked for the Moderna trial. And then I got nervous because it's one thing when you fill out the questionnaire and you think they're never going to call you, and then they call. She said that I'd been picked because I was type 1 diabetic. They needed to see if the vaccine was safe for people like me. I asked her a lot of questions because my first fear that a friend of mine had put in my head was, what if they give you the vaccine and then send you to like a high risk area and ask you to wander around without a mask or anything like that? And I thought, well, I'm not doing that. I've been super careful for the past 6 months because I think we heard pretty early on. I still remember that sinking feeling in my stomach back in February and March, where they started talking about the high risk people and seeing diabetes. And they just said diabetes. It didn't say type 1 or type 2, which drove me crazy because it's like, these are two different diseases. And do they mean, but whatever. When I had run into Dr. Fauci back on March 8th, when I was in the green room for a Meet the Press episode. And the first thing out of my mouth, I walk in and he was sitting on the chair, and it was like, wow, look, it's Dr. Fauci. Because it's like, I recognized him from TV. And I immediately started talking to him about COVID, because that's what he was there to talk about. And I was like, well, I'm type 1 diabetic and blah, blah. I was like, what happens if I get it? And he was like, he wasn't beating around the bush, but he kept saying, you need to not get it. And I was like, yeah, but what happens if I do get it? And he was like, no, you really need to not get it. And he was answering my question, but not answering my question. And I wanted to know, like, okay, most people get it and there's a 98% chance they'll be fine. Am I like a 93% chance, or what exactly what? And finally, by then he'd walked out the door to go on air because we weren't in the same segment. And he just stops at the door and he was like, look, I'm not saying that you're a dead duck, but you just really need to not get it. And then he leaves. And I was like, oh God, I really need to not get this. So I had covered the Ebola pandemic in Liberia in 2014. I'd been in Liberia for a month during Ebola. And at the time, I understood then that I really needed to not get Ebola as well, being a type 1 diabetic. So I put into place my Ebola protocols, I think I called them, on March 8th, where I was washing my hands all the time. I was staying away I stopped touching people. I've been really careful. I wear masks. I only just now recently stopped wearing gloves everywhere I went, but I had been doing that for a while. And nobody's come into my house except my mom, my sister, and my nephew and brother-in-law. I'm probably much more careful than most people are, because I think we kind of have to be, because there's so much we don't know. I'm just rambling at this point, not letting you ask any questions. I'll be quiet.
No, it's wonderful. A lot to unpack there, as we would say.
Yes.
So let me go back. When you said there's not a lot of information about type 1 and type 2, we, in the community, we're talking about that all the time.
Yeah. One of the things everybody I've asked about it has said they don't, because I went to my normal diabetic doctor and I was asking her about this. And she said the problem, they don't know. All they know is that the people who are showing up in the hospitals and needing to be put on ventilators and having severe reactions and getting really sick and dying, a lot of them tend to be diabetics. But then I asked, are they type 1 or are they type 2? And they're certainly type 2, but she seemed to think that they're type 1s as well. And that's what this is based on. At this point, there's so much about coronavirus that we don't know, COVID-19, that we don't know. And so the whole high risk category for diabetics, that has been determined simply based on the fact that these are the people who are showing up in the hospitals.
So let's talk about the vaccine trial. You get the call.
I get the call. I freak out. I called my friend. First, I called my normal doctor, but she's very super cautious. And her response was like, why does it have to be you? So I was like, okay, I'll park this somewhere for a second. And then I called my friend, Kendall Marcus, who's an infectious disease specialist. Her response was immediate. She was like, vaccines are super safe. You should do it. And for Kendall to be just complete, like usually she's cautious too. And she's like, you got to be careful. But it was just complete, no, you should do it. And so I got, we talked through it. And she, explained some very complicated sounding stuff about how they weren't, because I thought they were going to be putting a little bit of COVID in me. But she said that the Moderna one was not that. It's messenger RNA that's basically tricking your body into making antibodies by feeding you a little bit of mRNA that makes your body think that it has COVID. So she was like, there's no chance that you could catch it from this. And there's no chance that you could give it to anybody from this. And so I showed up for my appointment. It was on a Wednesday. They give you, you're there. I was there for 3 hours. They gave me a COVID test, the nasal swab, because if it comes back positive, you're not going to be in the trial because there's no point of you being in the trial. They gave me a lot of, they gave me a full physical, took blood, made me take a pregnancy test. There's all this stuff. And towards the end then is when I got the shot where the doctor was like, okay, you've been randomized, the blind woman is coming. It's like the unblinded person is coming in. I was like, what? Because of course I hadn't read. They told me all of that in a sheet that they sent me, but I hadn't read it.
Oh, geez.
So I didn't understand what you're talking about. Oh. That, which is my own fault. And then the nurse came in with the vaccine and she was not even look at me. And as a reporter, I'm like filled with questions. It was like, are you giving me the vaccine? What is that? Is that the placebo? Is that the vaccine? Which one is it? I'm going through all of this. I want to make sure I'm getting the vaccine, not no placebo. And she was just like, you need to just, she said nothing to me.
Honestly, if you know, and anybody else knows besides that person, then it can't be used, right?
It ruins the whole study. I got so much shit from people when I put that in the article that I was harassing the woman about this because they're like, you're violating the sanctity of the study. But it's just like, you kind of want to know if you got the placebo or vaccine.
When we posted your story in my Facebook group for the podcast, people were very not pleased.
No, I
shouldn't laugh, but I can tell your personality, right? I mean,
yes, you can laugh. Don't worry.
One of the questions that actually came up in that Facebook group was whether you were the only person with diabetes in the trial. Now, obviously, you don't know anybody else, but it was done.
I am not, because ever since I wrote that story, I've gotten a lot of people have tweeted me, including type 1 diabetics who are in the trial, who have been, and there's this one guy who's been so great because he's like, let me tell you what happened to me. I'm in the same type of trial. It's like his was with Pfizer, I think. Mine is Moderna, but it's the same technology. And he was like, the first shot felt totally normal, just like you. And then the second shot, my sugar level shot up. I was sick for 36 hours and then it went away. And he was like, but it was just as if I had, how you get when you're diabetic with the flu, your sugar level goes high and all that kind of stuff. I was like, that means you got the vaccine. And he was like, well, be careful, because because you sound like you don't think you got it. But I didn't think I got it when I got the first shot. And the second shot was like, So now I'm worried about the second shot.
Well, I was going to ask you, did you have any kind of reaction blood sugar wise to the first one?
Nope, nothing. I mean, just some aches and pains, some muscle joint, which I think was because I was camping on the beach and I got like I got the stuffing pounded out of me by these ferocious waves.
Wow. I'm curious if you asked your friend who said, what if they give you the vaccine and then they want you to test it by wandering around a hotspot? I can't imagine that's actually part of any clinical trial.
I would think, wouldn't you do that in phase 1? It's not part of phase 3, but wouldn't phase 1 be, remember, didn't you see Contagion?
Right, but she did that on her own.
Yeah, but they got to test it some kind of way. How are they going to find out if it works if they don't see if it works?
If they don't expose people to it in some way, shape, or form. I will.
That's what he was getting at. I got a lot of grief for putting that in the story, but I thought that was a very legitimate question to ask. And as a non-medical person, that's what you're going to wonder.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here for just a couple of minutes. If you are wondering about that point yourself, or maybe you are screaming at the two of us in frustration, here's the real deal about how they do vaccine trials. Once participants get a vaccine, will the researchers intentionally expose them, right? That's what we're talking about here. Will the researchers send Helene into a crowd of people, as in the movie Contagion, which, if you haven't seen it, it's a 2011 movie. It is all about, if you haven't guessed, it's all about a pandemic. There were scientists who worked on that movie and made it very realistic and therefore quite terrifying. But to the question of, do they send people who got the vaccine out into infected crowds? No, of course not. That is unethical. I did a little bit of looking into this, and so here's what most of the publications say. Because there are still no effective therapies to prevent someone exposed to COVID-19 from falling seriously ill, intentionally exposing patients is a no-go. Instead, the idea is to observe the number and severity of naturally occurring infections among the many thousands of volunteer participants who receive vaccines or placebos. If there are notably fewer infections or milder infections among the vaccinated group, that's how they tell the vaccine is working. So I wanted to take a moment and clarify that, and we will go right back to my talk with Helene in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Real Good Foods. We've been enjoying Real Good Foods for almost 2 years now, and I got to tell you, I think with all of their new products, everything's great, but the pizza that we started with is really still our favorite. And we got an air fryer a while back, and that has really taken stuff like this to the next level. Although I shouldn't say that, because my husband still prefers to heat up the pizza in a frying pan or saucepan. He'll just heat it up that way. I don't know, maybe he doesn't want to get the air fryer out, but to me, it's crispier, it tastes better, one less pan to wash at the end of the day. You can find out more about where to buy Real Good Foods. Their whole line is available in Walmart and local grocery stores. You can also find everything online. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Now, back to my conversation with Helene, where we are finishing up talking about that movie, Contagion. And obviously, that movie was worked on by experts. We've all heard all those stories by now.
Have you watched it since COVID started?
I can't bring myself.
You gotta go. No, you gotta go do it. I did it, and I like it'll make you even more careful.
Come on,
don't get it seriously. I watched it in March, and I was like, "Oh hell no, just stay home." I'm not going out.
I will. All right, I'll have to go back and look at that. Then what happens? Is it a second shot, and then you're done, or do you? I mean, they'll follow you, but are you done with injections?
They follow you up. There's an app that you have to answer. The first week, the app was making me answer questions every night, take my temperature, and all of that. And then it's gotten bored with me and it stopped now. So I because so I haven't gotten any good. So then you have the second shot and they follow up with you. They're supposed to call you every week and you answer questions on the app and they just track you. And so presumably it's a 2-year study, but they're shooting for, a few months.
Yeah, very quick. And because they wanted to look at people specifically with diabetes, are they also asking you to track blood sugars and things like that? Or they're just looking for safety?
Questions are remotely related to blood, which I find curious because that's like, they have not, the questions are fever, body aches, pains, and all of that. They didn't ask, none of the questions are, because the questions are all for the 30,000 people. So they're no special, I'm not in a special diabetic subgroup.
But it's interesting because you are in 3 subgroups: diabetes, asthma, and being a Black person.
Yeah.
So as you said, they were looking for people, do you know if they were successful trying, and this is going to sound, I don't even know how to ask this question. Did they find what they were looking for?
I don't know the answer. At GW, Moderna paused its trial to expand it because at first they weren't getting enough Black people. So they went and cast the net even wider. And I think they believe they've now got representative sampling. The people at GW said that they felt that the sampling that they were doing reflected the city of Washington, D.C., which means then that they had a high Black population.
So listen, you have a job that I assume you cannot do only from home.
No, I can't.
Because Pentagon is your beat.
I'm home a lot, and the Times went to send us home back in March 13th. Oh. And they're really good about that. And I do a lot of my job right now. I do at home, but it's so different. It's harder. And I do have to go to the Pentagon and I do meet sources. And so I wear I was issued N95 masks by the Times and, full, kit, not full kit, N95 mask. And when I go to work, like during the protests, for instance, I did a little bit of that. I went to the Pentagon when I go to meet for sources and all of that, especially when you're at the Pentagon where you have to wear a mask in the building. A lot of people don't wear masks inside their individual offices. I've been in to meet with top generals at the Pentagon who have you in their office, but they're not going to wear a mask. They will take your temperature, but I think that's pointless.
Yeah.
They'll test your temperature, but once you're inside, and then they'll always say, oh, you can take off your mask if you want, but I never do. That's when I wear the N95 because that will protect me, not just because you wear a mask to protect other people primarily, but the N95 will protect you. It's my hope.
Even before COVID, I'm curious, a high-powered career, very busy, but also very much in, when you work at the Pentagon, you're not fooling around. I'm curious if you would share a little bit about how you manage type 1
Sure.
on your job.
You have a son who's type 1, so you know that it becomes like brushing your teeth. It's just something you do. I'm testing myself, 8 to 9 times a day. I'm taking multiple shots a day. And that's just something. And I've gotten really used to, I test in front of anybody. I don't wait. I don't I don't go. My sister laughs at me because I take my shots through my clothing because sometimes you can't, the needle will go through your clothing. And if you're on an aircraft carrier in the middle of something, you don't have time to go find a bathroom to, whatever. And it's a long time ago, one of a Dr. Joshua Barzilay in Atlanta, when I just moved down there in my 20s. And he said, you have a choice. You can make the diabetes conform to your life, or you can make your life conform to your diabetes. And I made a choice. I was going to make the diabetes conform to my life. So I've done everything. I was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division for the Iraq War. I've been, with special ops groups, behind enemy line. I do all of that kind of stuff. And I keep a tight rein on my sugar levels, but there are plenty of times where I have problems. I've had insulin reactions, thousands of insulin reactions. Because if you keep in control, you're very close to low. Right. If you're keeping between 80 and 120, I've never gotten to the point where I have figured out how to keep between 80 and 120 and not have 60s, Yeah. If you're running around at 300, 400, then you're not going to have insulin reactions. But if you're keeping in control, then you're going to hit lows. And so I hit lows. I'm lucky in that I still feel them. Mm-hmm. I can tell when it's coming on. I carry sugar pills around with me everywhere. There's sugar pills in every pocketbook I have. There's sugar pills in my fanny pack. There's sugar pills everywhere. And that's sort of how I deal with it. And so I feel fine. I've had it for I'm 54 years old now, and I got it when I was 15. So that's a long time. I haven't had any of my kidneys are fine. My eyesight, I can't see for shit, but that's not because of,
hello, we're all wearing glasses.
Yeah. And everything so far, knock on wood, looks okay, but it's something that you just deal with. Which I assume, because you've got a son who's just dealing with it.
Do you use any, or have you used any of the technology, insulin pumps, CGM, stuff like that? Not your style?
I don't like the pump. I tried the pump and I didn't like it. I tried the continuous blood monitor and I didn't like it. So I use pens. I'm on Tresiba for my long acting, and I'm on Humalog for my short acting. And then I have the one touch, and it's 5 seconds and it's really easy. My doctor is so pissed at me because she's been after me and I won't do it. And every year she's like, look, it would be so much. I tried the Dexcom and I hated it. It was waking me up in the middle of the night and it was driving me nuts. And so I stopped after 1 month. And so I'm probably going to fold at some point, but I haven't folded yet.
Well, I wouldn't call it folding. If you want to try it, jump into the group where I know you know what you're doing, but there's some advice on how to not make it drive you up a freaking wall, because it can. Right.
I'd probably do that advice, because I think at some point I'm going to have to just do it.
Well, that's another story for another time.
Yeah.
Tell me about your diagnosis story. You were diagnosed at 15?
Yeah. My dad was diabetic. And for some reason, I think he was type 1. I don't remember if he was type 1 or type 2. This is because he died in 1985. And I think he was type 2, but he was taking insulin regularly and fairly aggressively, which makes me think maybe he was type 1 and we just didn't, I don't know. So
yeah, it's at that time too, they didn't know about LADA and all the other things.
Yeah. He was diagnosed when he was like 40. So I think that's why but anyway, so that's a whole nother side. Let's get into what I know. So anyway, and my mom, as it turns out now, is type 2. I'm from Liberia, West Africa, and my family had moved here in 1980. I was living with my dad. My parents had split up. My mom was back in Liberia for a year, and my sister and I were living with our dad in North Carolina in Greensboro. And I started running to the bathroom and being thirsty all the time. I was like 15 then, and I was a junior in high school. And I started dropping weight. I was skinny, but then I got really skinny. But I was eating, and I was so hungry all the time. And I was convinced I had blown up because I was eating like 6-7 meals a day and horribly hungry. And in the middle of the night, I was going downstairs and drinking apple juice and eating food. And I was like, I have to be so fat. Why am I eating like this? And my mom showed up to visit us, and she came to the house from Liberia, and she and my dad came to the school to surprise me because we didn't know my mom was coming. And they came to the school to surprise me, and they got me out of my class. And I go running. I was like, my God, my mom turns to my dad. She's like, what have you done to my daughter? He's living with me, and he's not noticing because you're seeing the person every day. So it's like, she's skin and bones. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm still not. You should see how much I eat. So I went to the doctor, and I was diagnosed, and I ended up in the hospital for a week in pediatrics.
Wow.
At 15, I was very outraged that they put me in pediatrics.
Yeah, I bet. But also at 15, you have no sense of your body, right? You're thinking, I must be fat. I'm eating so much. That's amazing.
Yeah. I was so convinced that I was a pig. I was like, I'm so fat. It was like all of it, whatever. But anyway, so that's when. And so I remember they put me on, this is so far long ago. This is like in the 80s. They put me on these 3 different types of insulin to start: Act Rapid, Semitard, some other top monotard. Wow. And I was having insulin reactions and then shooting up, and they were I would take 1 shot in the morning and that was it. And I couldn't get it under control. I was hungry all the time because they started me on too much insulin. And so I was hungry and eating, and it was just really, it was bad. And I was only testing, that's back when you would test with urine.
Right.
This is a long time ago. And so I took my insulin, but that was all I would do. I would take my insulin in the morning, but then I ate whatever I wanted. And so I was completely out of control. And it took years for me to get my act together. I mean, I went through college. I feel like on a wing and a prayer, I took my insulin. So I never went to the point where I didn't take my insulin, but there was a lot but I was eating whatever I wanted. And it wasn't like it was that much, but it was like, you need to be tested. And I wasn't testing. I would go a year and never test myself. And then when I got out of college, I started a job in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was working out a lot then. So my sugar level was probably much better was lower, but I was having insulin reactions all the time. And then when I moved to Atlanta and I met this Dr. Barzilay, and that's when he told me, you can do this or you can do that. And what he did for me, that was the most important thing, was if you are comfortable with taking multiple injections a day and with testing yourself all the time, you can do what you want. Yeah. And that was the breakthrough for me.
Right. Well, somebody gives you a plan of action. Rather than saying, here's the older insulins that really don't work to your life, here's a plan.
No,
it sounds like you followed that to the letter.
No, it was great because once I realized it was like, if I know, A, knowledge is power, and B, if you're willing to, and taking the shot is nothing. It doesn't bother me, and testing my blood sugar doesn't bother me. And if he's like, if you're willing to do that, you can live the way you want to live. So
that's great. Before I let you go, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the clinical trial. Okay. I know you're at the very beginning of it. Are you so far happy that you did it?
Yeah, I'm happy I did it. I want to be part of, I want to be part of the solution. No, none of us want to keep this going and it's like, we're all shut in and we want it over too, right? And it's at some point we're going to have to take a vaccine anyway. So yeah, I'm glad I did it, whether it's a placebo or a vaccine. I mean, if I drop dead from it, I won't be glad, but other than that, I'm going to be glad I did it. Right.
Well, there is a lot of skepticism among people of all political persuasions, of all races, of all disease states. I mean, let's be clear. I'm not singling anybody out here. Any message for people listening who may have an opportunity like that to take part in a clinical trial and are hesitant?
Follow the science. I'm a big believer in science. So I'm divorcing myself from the politics. The whole vaccine by election day, that's not even going to happen. That's irrelevant. Even if they have it'll at most be an announcement, but that's not going to mean anything, and that's meaningless, And so just follow science. If we follow science, we'd be better off on COVID to begin with, and science is certainly what's keeping me alive. So
next step for you is the second part of the vaccine. Yes. And then maybe we can follow up with you in a couple of weeks or months, if that's okay.
Happy to.
Wonderful.
Then I'll be complaining that they definitely gave me the placebo.
Well, and I can give you my review of Contagion. My re-review.
Okay. If you watch Contagion, I will come on your show again.
All right, we'll do. Well, I've seen it, but it's been a very long time. So
rewatch it.
Oh,
you won't sleep that night.
I don't sleep now. Helene, thank you so much for joining me. It was a real pleasure and so interesting. I appreciate it.
It was fun talking to you, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
More information about the vaccine trials, about Helene's story at diabetes-connections.com. Just click on this episode, click on the homepage for it. There is a transcript. We do that for every episode starting this year. Really excited about that. People seem to really like it. And I started that in January of 2020, and I'll continue to do that. I'm also going to link up one of the many articles about the difficulty that scientists have had and researchers have had in recruiting Black volunteers and other people of color to take part in these trials. And something to keep in mind is that the National Institutes of Health has suggested minorities be overrepresented in the testing at rates that are double for their percentage of the U.S. population. So there's a lot more information on this as to why and how historically Black medical institutions are getting involved. I thought that was very important. Of course, we're looking at this through the lens of type 1 diabetes, but this is something that as you listen, I think it's important to be aware of as well. And boy, do I appreciate Helene coming on and sharing her story, the good, the bad, the ugly. She got a lot of pushback, as you heard, for that article. And I will follow up in a couple of weeks, and I'm assuming she will have the same amount of candor next time we talk. Tell me something good in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And, we started using Control IQ, that is the Dexcom G6 tandem pump software program, back in late January of this year. And we are doing less work for better results. I'll say that again. Less work, better results with diabetes. And I say we, but it really is all Benny at this point. I mean, he's 15. And, you think about when we first got the CGM just to show up on the pump. What was that, 2017? And that was a cool feature, but it didn't do anything, right? But that secret sauce in the Control IQ that keeps Benny in range so much more, it really lightens the burden. I think that's the best way to describe it. His A1C has come down. It was already really good. We're just thrilled. Of course, individual results may vary. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. In Tell Me Something Good this week, we have some fun things to share. Diaversaries and birthdays. A very, very happy birthday to the Dooley family. And I'm going to wish a happy birthday to the whole family because parents Christina and Greg celebrating with their triplets, Mia, Issa, and Max. And I cannot believe that these kids are 10 years old. You may know the Dooleys better as the Inspired by Isabella family. Isabella was diagnosed with type 1 as a toddler, and she and her family have just been a huge part of the diabetes online community of Friends for Life. It's so many things. And boy, these kids are just knocking it out of the park, each with their own personality and strengths, of course, and different hobbies. But they all really seem to come together to support Issa. Christina is one of these very creative moms. She does all the stuff that I never did or dreamed of doing. Very crafty, very, very fun with costumes, lots of lawn stuff going on since they've been stuck at home. I mean, this 10th birthday, I'll see if she'll put a picture or two in the Facebook group, but number 10s all over their lawn and big cutouts for the kids' hobbies. So a big happy birthday to the Dooley triplets, to Mia, Issa, and Max. A big congratulations and a big diaversary to Dennis Goldensohn. Dennis is a longtime listener. And I first talked to him. He's been on the show I talked to him about reaching the age of 65 when Medicare kicks in. And we talked when he had just finished his first year on Medicare. So I will link that up. But I'm mentioning him now because he is celebrating 50 years of type 1 diabetes. And he posted in the Facebook group, he has that Lilly medal that they give for big milestones. And he wrote, "Hey, everybody, thanks," because he was getting a lot of really nice comments about it. "The objective here is not to brag about an award, but to say, yes, it is possible to live with T1D and live a productive and long life. Now that is worth bragging about and what is really possible. Lead by example." Dennis is also very active in JDRF. I was going to say his local chapter, but I think we're all one chapter now in North Carolina. So he's in the Raleigh area. I'm in the Charlotte area. But he's also active as a mentor. And I really appreciate it. So congratulations, Dennis. Here's to many more healthy years. And thanks for sharing that with us. My episode last week with Jeannie Martin, who was diagnosed in the 1950s and has lived with type 1 for 66 years, got a lot of attention. And it was just very well received. I mean, why not? She's fantastic. And I heard from other people who have lived with type 1 for a long time who shared their stories. And Ron Doyle is one of those. He was diagnosed at age 4 in 1959. I am living life well. I'm a full-time employee at age 65. I'm going to retire in my 70s. My docs told my parents I would likely be dead before age 6, but it's been a great life. And he writes, "I still have all my toes and other important extremities." And Ron also shared, I shot him an email back and said, "Hey, thanks so much. Can I share this?" And he replied, "Absolutely. Most people need all the good news they can get." He works full-time as an IT guy, and he has a monthly radio show on tech. I'm going to link this up because his podcast, he says, is tech for us gray hairs like me. I like to stay busy, Ron writes. And I will link up Gray-Haired Tech because I don't have any gray hair yet, Ron, but I probably could benefit from your podcast. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. If you have a good news story, a diaversary, a birthday, something cool you've done, a big milestone, a marathon, or you've gone up Mount Everest, whatever you want to share with the community, just reach out and let me know. You can always find me, Stacey, at diabetes-connections.com. Or you can post in the Facebook group. Every once in a while, I will ask for more good news stories. I love hearing from you. Thank you so much. My new segment, Innovations, is all about tips and tricks, listener suggestions to make life a little bit easier with diabetes. And sometimes the innovations are big clinical trials, approvals, that sort of thing. This week, I want to talk a little bit about organization with a great bit of advice I got from Susan Weiner. She is very well known in the diabetes community. She was the 2015 Diabetes Educator of the Year. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist, a certified diabetes educator. She's the best. I love Susan. I'm lucky enough to call her a friend. One of the things that she told me, and she has a great book too, it's called The Complete Diabetes Organizer. And while that book has so much advice in it, we're just going to focus on one little thing here, and that is being able to see what you've got in terms of diabetes supplies. So if that means you're taking the stuff out of the boxes, I mean, we know we get pump supplies or Dexcom supplies or even insulin. It's in a box that you cannot see through. So her advice is to put it in a clear plastic box so you can see from the outside. Or if you really can't tell, at least mark what it is on the outside, tape a piece of paper and use a Sharpie and write on it, or use a clear plastic shoe bag. You can put individual supplies there. So I've seen people put snacks in it so the kids can get what they want. Carb counted snacks are separated, however you want to do it in your household, but everybody can see. And the one thing I would add to that is whatever you do, if you're taking your diabetes supplies out of boxes, and I do this because I also use, speaking of organized, here's a little plug. I use the T1D 3D gear. Folks, there's a really wonderful small homegrown business and they do 3D printing and I'll link that up in the show notes as well. But I use their stuff a lot. But you have to take everything out of the box. You've got to keep the labels. If you need the lot number, if you have an issue, if you need the serial number of your Dexcom, all this stuff. So if you don't have room to keep the actual boxes and you're not a big ripper offer, a lot of people hate to keep those little strands of paper, I'll rip off the front where it has all of the information or cut it out neatly. Haha. I don't cut anything neatly. I claw it off like an animal. But you could also take a photo, take a picture with your phone of the lot number and all of the information. And that way you'll know what goes with what. And that way, if you have to call in a Dexcom replacement or you have a box of pump insets that are not working correctly, you'll have the information in front of you and you can call it in. it's all well and good to get organized, but if you can't see when you're running out of something, and then I know the people with little kids don't get this yet, but when your teenager uses the last Dexcom and doesn't tell you and leaves the box in the storage area, right? Or uses the last pump inset and just hasn't said anything, didn't realize it was the last one. That's where the yoga and meditation comes in. So you can use these tips maybe to avoid those kinds of situations. And thanks again to Susan Weiner. I'll link up that episode too. Gosh, I think it's about 2 years, maybe longer now, since we've talked. But it was a great episode about getting diabetes organized. I love her. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Diabetes Connections. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. In fact, I have so much. I might have to do some more bonus episodes. I don't know. I'm sifting through personal stories and sports stories and technology stuff. It seems like towards the end of the year, we take a breath in August and the beginning of September, and then it's just a race to December. And that's how it's going this year. So I'll keep you posted, but please join the Facebook group. That's where I've put most of my questions for you and polling and that sort of stuff. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much as you listen. I'm Stacey Simms. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.